Chapter 7. Diana is invited to tea. October was a beautiful month at Green Gables, when the maple leaves turned bright red. Anne loved the world of color around her. She decorated her room with the tree branches. One morning, Marilla announced that she was going a few miles away to a meeting of the Aid Society. "I won't be home before dark. You'll have to get Matthew his supper, and you can ask Diana to come over for tea this afternoon." "Oh, Marilla," Anne said happily, "that's just what I have wanted. It will be so nice and grown up. Can I use the fancy tea set?" "No, indeed. Use the old brown tea set. But you can open the cherry jam and put out some cake and cookies." "This will be wonderful. Can I take her into the living room to sit?" "No, the kitchen will do for you and your company. But there's a half bottle of raspberry juice left over from the party the other night. You and Diana may have it if you like." Anne was so excited she ran over to Diana's right away to ask her to tea. As a result, just after Marilla had driven off, Diana came over dressed in her second-best dress and looking very ladylike when she knocked on the door. When Anne, dressed in her second-best dress, opened it, the two girls shook hands as if they had never met before. They spent most of the afternoon outside, eating apples in the orchard and talking as hard as they could. Diana had much to tell Anne of what went on in school. She had to sit with Gertie Pye, and she hated it. Everybody missed Anne and wished she'd come to school again. And Gilbert Blythe? But Anne didn't want to hear about Gilbert Blythe. She jumped up quickly and said they should go in and have some raspberry juice. Anne looked for the raspberry juice in the kitchen, but she couldn't find it. Then she saw it up high on a shelf. Anne put it on a tray and set it on the table with a glass. "Now, please help yourself, Diana," she said politely. "I don't think I want any just now, after all those apples." Diana poured herself a glass, looked at its pretty red color, and took a small taste. "That's awfully nice, Anne. I didn't know raspberry juice was so nice." "I'm real glad you like it. Take as much as you want. I'm going to run out and stir the fire up. There are so many responsibilities on a person's mind when they are keeping a house, aren't there?" When Anne came back, Diana was finishing her second glass. "Have another," encouraged Anne. Diana filled her glass again. "The nicest I ever drank," said Diana. "Marilla is a famous cook," agreed Anne. "She is trying to teach me, but it is hard work. There is no room for imagination in cooking. You must go by the rules. The last time I made a cake, I forgot to put the flour in. I was thinking the loveliest story about you and me, Diana. But the cake completely failed. Flour is so essential to cakes." Marilla was very cross, and I don't wonder. "Why, Diana, what is the matter?" Diana had stood up, then sat down again, putting her hands to her head. I'm awful sick," she said, a little thickly. "I must go right home." "Oh, you mustn't dream of going home without your tea," cried Anne. "I'll go and put it out right now." "I must go home," repeated Diana. "I'm awfully dizzy." Anne, with tears of disappointment in her eyes, got Diana's hat and went with her as far as the berry yard fence. Then she wept all the way back to Green Gables, where she sadly put the rest of the raspberry juice back and got tea ready for Matthew. The next day was Sunday, and as rain poured down from dawn to dusk, Anne did not go out. On Monday afternoon, Marilla sent her to the neighbor's house to get something. In a very short time, she came flying back up the lane, with tears rolling down her cheeks. "Whatever has gone wrong now, Anne?" asked Marilla in doubt and surprise. No answer from Anne, except more tears. "Anne Shirley, when I ask you a question, I want to be answered. Sit right up this very minute and tell me what you are crying about." Anne sat up. "I heard that Mrs. Barry was in an awful state. She says I got Diana drunk on Saturday and sent her home in terrible condition. She says I must be a very bad girl, and she's never going to let Diana play with me again. Oh, Marilla, I'm in deep despair." Marilla stared in shock. "Got Diana drunk?" she said when she found her voice. "Anne, are you or Mrs. Barry mad? What on earth did you give her?" "Not a thing but raspberry juice," cried Anne. "I never thought that could get a person drunk, not even 3 big glasses full, as Diana had. I didn't mean to do it." "Drunk? Fiddlesticks," said Marilla, marching to the kitchen. There, on the shelf, was a bottle which she at once recognized as her own homemade currant wine, for which she was famous in Avonlea. At the same time, Marilla remembered that she had put the raspberry juice downstairs instead of in the kitchen, as she had told Anne she would. She went back to Anne with the wine bottle in her hand and a little smile on her face. "Anne, you certainly have a genius for getting into trouble. You went and gave Diana currant wine. Don't you know the difference?" "I never tasted it," said Anne. "I thought it was juice. I meant to be generous. Diana got sick and had to go home. Mrs. Barry told me Diana was simply dead drunk, and she thinks I did it on purpose. Don't be foolish, Anne. You'd best go up there this evening and tell her what happened." "I don't have the courage to face Diana's mother." "I wish you'd go, Marilla." "Well, then, I will," said Marilla, realizing that would be the wiser course. "Don't cry any more, Anne. It will be all right." Marilla had changed her mind about it being all right by the time she got back. Anne was watching for her and flew to the door to meet her. "Oh, Marilla, I know by your face that it's been no use," she said sadly. "Mrs. Barry won't forgive me." "Mrs. Barry, indeed," said Marilla. "She is the most difficult woman I ever saw. I told her it was all a mistake, but she didn't believe me." Marilla came into the kitchen quickly, leaving Anne at the door. Next, Anne went over to Mrs. Barry's door to ask for forgiveness, but she was met with a cold face. "What do you want?" said Mrs. Barry angrily. "Oh, Mrs. Barry, please forgive me. I did not mean to do it. How could I? Imagine if you were a poor orphan girl, the kind that people had adopted, and you had only one friend in the world. Do you think you would get her drunk on purpose? I thought it was only raspberry juice. Believe me, please let Diana play with me again." This speech had no effect on Mrs. Barry, except to anger her more. She thought Anne was making fun of her. So she said coldly and cruelly, "I don't think you are a fit little girl for Diana to associate with. You'd better go home." Anne went back to Green Gables in quiet despair. "My last hope is gone," she told Marilla. "There is nothing more to do than pray, And I haven't much hope that that'll do much good, because I don't think God himself could do very much with a hard-headed woman like Mrs. Barry." "Anne, you shouldn't say such things," said Marilla sharply. But when she looked into the east gable before going to bed and found that Anne had cried herself to sleep, an unusual softness came into her face. "Poor little girl," she whispered. Then she bent down and kissed her on the cheek.